I can give you the greatest strategy you've ever seen. I can put the right tools in place. I can design the best possible process. At the end of the day, there's people engaged in that, and if your organization is full of conflict, lack of alignment, poor communication, talent gaps, etc., none of that other stuff matters.
Welcome to the Schmidt List, the podcast for people dedicated to managing successful projects, developing impactful products, and building engaged teams. And now, here's your host, Kurt Schmidt.
Shannon, hi. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Thanks for coming on the show. I'm doing great.
Well, thanks for having me.
No, thanks for coming. I'm really excited to talk to you. So you work in customer experience. So tell me a little bit about your background. What are you doing these days, and how did you get into what you do?
Yeah, I'll try to make a really long story short, but I started my career in sales, okay. And my personality, my style is a little bit of a sequential thinker, very analytical, very process-oriented, and so I ended up being a little bit better at sales management than actual in the field sales. And so career kind of evolved to sales management, and then that led to sales operations, and that's kind of where I started finding my sweet spot, because it's all about the internal processes, tools, management of people that drive performance. And so sales operations led to customer service, which led to customer experience. And so that's kind of how the career evolved. Most of my career has been in the telecommunications industry. Okay. First on the service provider side, and then eventually with telecommunication equipment providers. And then most recently, for 8 years, I led a customer experience consulting firm that was primarily focused on driving process improvement and corporate transformation as a result, and guided by customer feedback that we collected. And then just very, very recently, our firm was acquired by Service 800, where I'm now the VP of Operations and Technology.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's great.
Very excited.
So let's talk a little bit about customer experience, because I've experienced it, not to nomenclature-wise, but I've experienced it from a professional standpoint on two sorts of sides. One from the consulting side, where, like you say, you do the research and you bring back these findings and you're like, here you go. And then you wait to hopefully they do something with that info. Right. Whereas on the other side, where I've been a part of firms where there's been experienced people that come in and kind of give you that data, and they're like, here you go, do something with that. And then you try to do these initiatives and things. You know, where have you seen that sort of engagement work really well, where you've seen actual traction happen from, you've been in consulting for a while, you come in and give your recommendations. Is it that, let's say I'm one of those people that hire Shannon to come in, do I want you just to drop it off and leave, or do you just where have you seen it work?
Yeah, there's actually a lot in that question, probably more than you realize. Where it works, at least from my experience, is one of two places. Either in an organization that's led by a customer experience advocate, a believer. I mean, there's almost a faith-based correlation here. And I put people in this customer experience believer category. They just understand that if I'm going to build a legacy brand, if I'm going to beat my competition, it's about how I serve my customers better than they do. Okay. And so everything kind of flows from that. And when you're working in that kind of environment, it is about showing that executive how we drive a differentiated experience from their competitors, what that looks like, how we build the systems and processes to get it done. And so working with leaders that come from that mindset are really easy, because they're looking for someone to help them understand what customers want and drive change in the business. Mm-hmm. The flip side of those leaders are the more financially led, self-interest, short-term decision makers. And then it's about, show me what I have to do with my customers just to make them buy more tomorrow.
Yeah, show me the direct ROI. Like,
exactly.
This research equals 30% more profit.
Right. I mean, it's just kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it's almost as if I don't care if they hate me, if they spend more, we win, right?
Sure.
And
I've had leaders like that.
Sometimes that can work in the short term. So it's that kind of leader, that customer experience advocate leader, that tends to work. The latter doesn't. And then on the other way you can distinguish between success and failure is organizations that are prepared and ready for change. If the attitude is we're going to do something with the feedback we collect from our customers versus we're going to see what it tells us and maybe we'll do something, that's the other distinguishing point of failure or success. Mm-hmm. Are they ready to make a move? Are they committed that action's going to follow the feedback? And to your point, the other part of your question, we have lots of clients that one, either they take the feedback, they argue about it and set it on the shelf and go back to doing what they were doing before. Or I think I do have executives that just want the information. They're not necessarily motivated to drive change. They want to CYA. They want to say that they're customer experience focused. And how can I be customer experience focused if I'm not asking customers? So I'll check that box. Customers will think that I love them because I'm asking them things, but I'm not actually going to do anything with it. So that does happen a lot. I would say it's the biggest challenge in our industry is not collecting feedback. It's not having the right tools and not having the right analytics. It is doing something with the information once you get it is the biggest challenge.
Yeah, see, that transcends I've seen, and I've been doing this show for a while, and I hear people talk about it even from a data standpoint, from an analytical standpoint, from, like you said, customer feedback standpoint, is a lot of times, especially like here at Foundry, when we walk into organizations and we're trying to do some research to find out what we can actually do to help them solve their problems, is that we find that there's tons of data, but nobody's done anything with it. Yeah. Why is that, Shannon?
Well,
your experience?
Part of it is our fault as CX companies. You look at some of the big firms, and I won't mention names, but they're focused on technology. They're focused on the tools, the web survey platforms, the analytics tools, the dashboards, et cetera. Those are the things they're focused on. I think part of that is because we're in an innovative culture, but also it's easy for an executive to get his head around a tool,
a dashboard,
as opposed to
I'm tracking
a operating principle, a mindset, a culture. And so some of the biggest CX firms out there are advocating promoting technology and tools, not change management, not customer experience culture. So I think part of it is the kind of nature of what's being promoted in the industry.
There's a holistic thing, right, that needs to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's harder. That's much, it's easy. And we've all been in environments where we pick a tool, we install the tool, problem solved. That's BS, right? The tool is just a tool. I'm no better a carpenter with a new hammer than I was with my tack hammer. And so it's harder. And I think the other big challenge is it's longer. I don't transform the experience I provide to my customers overnight, and the results I get from that don't happen overnight. And I think a lot of executives today, blame it on Wall Street, blame it on whatever, are looking for very, very quick wins.
Yeah, they want something that increases profits in the third quarter.
Exactly. And this is a long-term game. I mean, sometimes I'll ask the question, what are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to create a legacy, successful brand, or are you trying to boost revenue next quarter? Right. And if you're doing the latter, the customer experience is a hard sell.
Yeah. Well, because like you're saying, it's kind of that longer tail, that thing that's building sentiment over time. Yep. And but to your point, let's back up just a little bit, because I think you said this earlier, and this is what I've experienced too, is that you have to have a decision maker that's an advocate for this in the organization for it to work. It can't just be the 8th initiative out of 20 for this year, right? Which is, just it's piled in the corner and you got some dust on it, and we'll bring in this Shannon guy and he can do something there and make a report for us, and we did that, right? So that advocate I've seen in a number of areas within the organization. But would you say that advocate normally lands in sales or marketing?
That's a really interesting question. I would say yes. Okay. Most often that is where you find them. And it seems to me, this is just one man's observation, that the folks that are running operations and are in CEO level jobs tend to come from a finance background. That just seems to be more common, at least in my customer bases. And I think there are some characteristics around a person that comes out of finance. I mean, they tend to be a little less relationship oriented, like sales folks are. The whole sales thing is a bit of a mystery to them. Customer experience feels soft and fuzzy and unidentifiable and quantifiable. Yeah. And they're uncomfortable with that. They tend to focus on short-term returns because that's the pressure they're getting. And so it's much, much harder for folks with that background to get their head around it normally. They can be convinced, and this is a soapbox I've been on for a little while, I think as customer experience practitioners, we've been going about it all wrong. For those companies where we don't don't have that advocate in place, we need to change our approach. And the approach needs to be not one of convincing that executive that the soft fuzzy matters, that customers loving us matters and has an impact on our bottom line. Not that we need to change culture, not that we need to put good listening posts in place. It needs to be one in their language, which is what is the financial return. And so instead of building these big programs, if you're in an environment where you don't have an advocate, I would suggest the first thing to do is all about collecting data. Yes, collect customer feedback, but spend tons of time correlating that feedback with business outcomes and spend a year, 2 years doing that. So now you can walk into that CEO's office and say, I've been tracking customer sentiment, and when customers answer certain questions this way, here's historically what's happened to their buying patterns. Here's what's happened to the renewal rate. And so now I've got some data to show them that if I make them feel this way, I can see the revenue changing in the business. Because until you have that, those executives don't care.
Yeah, that's a good point. So let's start from the beginning here. So let's say I'm new to all this, or I'm interested in customer experience as part of like my role. Maybe I'm in user experience and I'm trying to understand. I mean, user experience does a lot of research and things too, right? But where do I start? Where's a great place to start, Shannon? Like, should I just start with Net Promoter Score and call it a day? Or where's a good place to start if I haven't had a program specifically around gathering that data?
Yeah, so Jim Tincher just recently released a book about journey mapping, and he has a phrase he uses consistently in there that I love. The mindset of, the place to start is to find out what is the business problem you're trying to solve. Right? You don't do customer experience because the business problem is I'm not doing customer experience or I'm not collecting feedback. That's not the business problem. You're trying to solve some problem in your business, and you got to start on that basis.
Well, let's say it's returning customers. I'm not getting customers re-upping or returning as much. Like, where's a good place to start for that? Yeah,
for me, actually, internally is a great place to start.
Okay.
Generally, the folks that are managing your customers every single day probably have a decent perspective. They have probably an 80% valid perspective on why customers are renewing or not renewing. And I would start there because you want to make the most of that first feedback collection exercise that you do with your customers. So I would start with internal stakeholder interviews, both on what do we want renewals to look like and what is causing our customers to renew or not to renew. What is our hypothesis on that internally? So that's probably the first place I'd start. The second place I would start, kind of related to that internal perspective, is what do we think the customer's journey through that renewal process looks like? What do they? It's typical journey mapping. What are they thinking, feeling, observing? What do they want as they go through that process, and identifying those moments that matter where the sentiment is the most impacted or the biggest impact on decision of, do I continue down this process with you or do I exit? What are those exit points? And then once you've captured those things, I have a business problem I'm trying to solve. I understand internally what we think the hypotheses are. I've given some hypothesis around what I think the customer's experiences they go through it, and now it's time for me to go out and validate that with customers. I think surveys are a great place to start. They get a really bad name these days.
Because that's another thing I was going to ask you about. Tell me more about it, because again, like I see some people out there going, surveys are the best thing ever, and other people are like, I don't fill out surveys, so why would anybody else do it?
They have a place, and I think the biggest reason people hate surveys is they know the companies they're responding to don't do a damn thing with them. If you did a survey tomorrow on the new BMW you just bought, and you got a call a day later that said, hey, got your feedback, understand this is a problem, we're doing these 5 things to correct that problem, so we've heard that before, you'd respond to the next survey you get from them.
Oh, yeah.
Right? But 100%. That never, ever, ever happens.
Why doesn't that happen, Shannon?
It's because I think in a lot of cases, companies have customer experience programs because they're supposed to have customer experience programs.
Because they checked a box.
Right, yeah. You'll think I care if I'm asking you, right?
Sure.
But I don't. I don't really care. Not enough to put money in investment.
I definitely had that experience where I've had a larger organization, send me a thing, and I got a personal note from a manager, right? And instead of filling out the survey, I just responded to the email to that manager, because because it was like his email address. It wasn't like info@ or whatever. And I put in this nice thing that said I had a great experience and I really appreciate it, and you should give all these people raises and blah, blah, blah. Never got a response from that person. And then I got the survey resent to me like a week later. It's like, okay, well, that was a waste of time.
Yeah. And just be honest, sending surveys is easy. I mean, if that's all you're doing, that's super easy. So I can put that in place, let those run. Customers think I'm listening. So it's just not as easy to have an actual program that responds to the feedback you get. So that's why the companies don't do it. So they get a bad rap because they're very pervasive. They don't have a ton of impact if you're not actually doing something with the data. And many of them are done wrong. So a transactional survey. So I go to the dentist office. The survey I get after that visit should be 5 questions. When I get that survey and it's 30 questions, I'm not going to respond.
No.
Right?
That's a lot of effort.
Right. So there's, both relationship and transactional. They need to be structured differently. There's also, are you surveying the right people? If I have strategic questions, no one's going to answer strategic questions in a survey. Those need to be face-to-face. So there's times and places to use it. But the thing I like about it is because it's low effort, because I can touch a lot of people, and because it's quantitative in nature, it's a great place to start your program. It's validating the things you think internally, learning a few more things, and then it's always iterative. I love companies that think they can put a survey in place and they use the same survey every quarter for 5 years. So you haven't changed, your customers haven't changed, there's nothing new you want to know. You should be learning something from every outcast, and your survey should change and adapt.
And it should be an iterative process, right?
So that's the next step I would take. I would do some kind of both a combination of transactional and relational, because I think the experience companies have and the sentiment they have with you is different on a transactional relational basis. But I would start with surveys to get a baseline of what customers are thinking, the experience they're having, what they want from us. I'd gather some competitive information through that. So how do we compare and rank against others? Why are they buying from us? Blah, blah, blah. Okay. And then now I've gotten that. Now it's time to get serious. So now I have a baseline to start with. That data should point me in some directions. It should help develop some hypotheses that these are the levers we might need to pull. How do we want to pull those? And now I should be starting to talk to customers. I should be conducting interviews and focus groups and advisory boards and getting meaningful strategic feedback that guides the prioritization of what I think I need to focus on. What do my customers want to focus on? I love conjoint analysis because it causes customers to choose between some options of what they'd rather have. And so starting to put some measures in place and techniques in place that start to develop a list of what I want to go do. And then I got to prioritize that list based on level versus impact, margin impact, customer sentiment impact, what aligns with my strategy and what doesn't, who do I want to be in the marketplace. And then finally, so now I've gone through all that. Now I'm at a point where I've prioritized a list of actions. Now I actually have to go do them. And this is where even if I'd gotten you to that part, this is where things always seem to fall down.
Well, and tell me if I'm wrong, but one of the times I've experienced that is where it's maybe like this kind of siloed group that's doing all of this work, and then now they need the rest of the organization. They need the sales team, the marketing team, production team, all to like join hands now around this data.
Right.
But because they might not have been brought along the journey, maybe they're not trusting of that information.
Well, not only that, they've got conflicting interests. I mean, if I'm a sales guy, I need the cheapest possible product with the most possible features with the highest possible quality, right? If I'm the product management guy, I want the lowest number of SKUs with the highest margin per SKU, right? Yep. So each of these organizations has conflicting goals. And if we're operating in silos, it's really hard to come together. And that's why the companies that provide the best customer experience, they tend to have a customer experience officer and not the common customer experience officer, which is a customer service leader who has been given a title with no authority and accountability.
They just run the call center.
Right. This is a person that actually can pull levers across the entire organization. Our manufacturing process needs to change. The language in our marketing needs to change. And they can direct and influence those behaviors across this is a C-level function with authority to drive other organizational leaders, but it's not super common.
Yeah. Because like I said before, where I've seen is that role gets masked in chief salesperson or the chief marketing person, right?
Yeah, and salespeople are a great advocate for it because, and actually customer service people are as well. These are two functions that are day to day in front of the customer. They're hearing the feedback. I mean, you got to filter out the noise. This is a personal perception. I think there's a little more noise in the sales organization because their primary mindset is what have I got to do to get my customer to buy more, which is important to all of us. Yep. But our customer service folks, they do think about that, but they're also thinking about what makes my customer upset, angry, frustrated, et cetera. But they're great data points. And a lot of times that's where we'll start in an organization.
Well, it makes sense because, again, like you said, that I've said this on this show before, a lot of times innovation is driven through sales because they are so close to hearing what the customer's needs and what they don't want, that they're bringing ideas back into the organization saying, this is what I'm hearing. But to your point, if you don't have a strong program in place, a lot of that just turns into anecdotal conversation, right? It's like this top salesman is always ranting about how our clients don't like blue or something, but nobody listens to him because he's the top salesman and he'll keep selling the blue stuff.
Yeah, and it's funny when you start pulling that thread, what you might learn. So we had an engagement where we were brought in because the leadership team was frustrated and tired of hearing the sales team complain about lead times. Okay. And so what they wanted to know from us was kind of a more traditional market research approach, which was, are our lead times really that bad? Are they uncompetitive? And so we did kind of the traditional investigation of looking at 5 different products across 5 different competitors. How did they stack up by doing phone interviews with customers? Mm-hmm. We discovered that, yes, across these 5 categories, across these 5 competitors, you're not all that competitive, right? So we validated what the sales team had been saying all along. But we went a couple steps further, and we asked for that lead time comparison on when I call you to get a quote, when I place the order, and when it actually shows up.
So the whole journey.
The whole journey. Mm-hmm. And so there's some really interesting things there because the biggest frustration came on the lead time gap on when it actually arrives versus everything else. And then finally, when the customer was asked which problem to solve, would you rather have a product here much faster but with greater variability, or would you have it slower but it always shows up on time? And they always chose the latter in this industry because the delivery of product meant I got to have people on site to receive it, to install it, et cetera, right? And so the problem of committing to a date and hitting it is a much easier problem to solve than shaving 3 weeks off your manufacturing process, right? And so by following that thread, you get to an answer, but it can be an easier answer. And in a similar customer, we did something just like that. And the answer for them was just communication. Even if you're going to be late, tell me. I don't want the phone call after it was supposed to show up on Tuesday. You call me on Wednesday and say, hey, we're going to be late. I don't want to be on site and you don't show up, and that's how I find out you're late. Tell me 3 days ahead of time and I can make adjustments. And so, again, solving a communication problem is a lot easier than transforming manufacturing.
Changing your whole process. And that's the thing I found interesting. And just as an aside, as being a consultant in some cases in the past, being brought in as kind of the I told you so stick, which is also an interesting dynamic, right? When it's, we'll bring in Shannon because I need these salespeople to shut up about our lead.
Well, so it's a little bit of a tangent, but I think that's kind of an amazing thing about the consulting world. I can come in and say what everybody else has been saying already, and somehow it has weight and credibility. I think there's some reasons for that. I mean, I'm a third party without a vested interest in the business. I don't have any axe to grind in this, so I think that's part of it. The second is we do have some cross-industry experience. So we've got some outside experience we can play. And thirdly, we can help break ties. And we do a lot of kind of therapy with organizations who are managing conflict, right? The answers are there in front of them. They just hate each other, and we got to work through that.
Yeah, they got to see each other every day.
Right.
Now, it's a lot of the workshop stuff we do here at Foundry is like we do a lot of problem statement design, right? So we're just trying to help you figure out what is the problem, but align on it and put it into words and nomenclature that everybody here can agree on. Yeah. And that, it seems like something people can do themselves, right? But it's It's not. It's so hard,
Us pesky human beings, we get in the way all the time.
I know it'd be so much easier without the human being.
We were all robots.
Yeah.
I was just, this morning I spent some time with an HR leader, and that's the conversation we were having. And I see this in the consulting world. I can give you the greatest strategy you've ever seen. I can put the right tools in place. I can design the best possible process. At the end of the day, there's people engaged in that. And if your organization is full of conflict, lack of alignment, poor communication, talent gaps, etc., none of that other stuff matters. I've just put some really good tools and plans in place so people can't execute on them. And so it's interesting how much we forget. And it kind of circles us back to why stuff doesn't get done. Once we've identified the customers want these things from us, we still have an organization that's got to execute on that.
Yeah. I've been doing this too long, so it's like I know what's going to happen already before it happens. And I was brought into a fairly large organization not long ago, and I was asked to help with this very difficult salesperson on this other side that was keeping data from this group that would allow them to be successful, right? And they went on and on about how annoying this person was and stuff, right? And I said, cool, well, I think I can help, but first I need to go and get his side of the story. And they were like, well, no.
Why would you do that?
Why would you do that? They're like, what are you going to do to fix it? I was like, well, first I need to get his side of the story. So to your point, in order to be successful, I had to go out and survey him to be like, what was his experience, right? Because again, like the easiest thing for me to do would have been to walk over to the guy and be like, what are these idiots trying to make you do?
Right.
And that's a cheap way to do it. But, but again, to your point, if I want to fix it for the longer term, right, you have to look at where the root problem is.
That's right.
And be able to get everybody aligned on it and point at it and say, this is the root problem I'm seeing. Does everybody agree that this is the root problem? Because any new things you try to come up with later to fix those things, if it does not tie and correlate straight back to that initial problem statement, then you're probably off doing something you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, not only that, you're collecting the information from the root of the challenge you're trying to address. And
right.
Eric Ingwell, who runs AG Insight here locally, we partner with, their expertise is in face-to-face interviews, strategic interviews. And he gives an analogy about, if I had a problem with my wife, I wouldn't go ask everybody else around me about what problem my wife has with me and then go tell her what I heard and what I'm going to do about it. I might talk to her directly.
Yeah, you could just go do that.
Right.
But the other seems more comfortable.
It does. It's a lot more comfortable, yeah.
Well, back to your point about it's human nature and stuff, right? And that we in these organizations they're putting in these rules, they're finding success, and they're sticking in their ways. But customer sentiment over the years has changed a lot, right? And this is why they talk about and I say this too often, but there's digital transformation, but there's nothing digital about it. It's all cultural transformation.
I want to jump in on something you just said because I think that is a misconception. I don't think sentiment's really changed. The level of general satisfaction of customers with the companies they do business with hasn't improved. Their expectations have gone up exponentially.
Yeah.
But companies' ability overall to deliver phenomenal experiences hasn't changed all that much.
Yeah, well, and I think to that point, I think the experience has changed more because today I consume in the world interacting with a lot less humans than I used to.
Yeah.
20
How the experience is delivered has changed a lot.
Yeah, and so my expectations have changed due to that, and I think that-that's where I'm seeing a lot of folks struggling because, especially older organizations, because they're used to already, well, we've got door-to-door salesmen, like, you know what I mean? But now there's no, everybody's virtual,
right?
Right. So how, and to your point about us being people, I might answer a survey different than if you were sitting across from me and interviewing me about that information.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And that's why there's so many different feedback collection mechanisms, and there's a place for all of them. So, as I mentioned, there's a place for surveys. There's a place for phone interviews. They look a lot like surveys. They're not as expensive as face-to-face interviews, but they're deeper and richer in the feedback you collect, and there's a human element to it.
More nuance.
There's a place for strategic interviews to think about, what do we need? How do we need to position ourselves as a company to be more valuable to you as a leader in your business? There's a place for transactional and relationship relationship feedback collection. I mean, so there's tons of metrics. And you asked early on, should I start with Net Promoter Score?
Yeah.
It's not the score that matters. It's the information behind the score. And we can talk about the scores if you like, but the number doesn't matter. It's what made the number what it is that's important.
Yeah, and that's the thing I see people touting a lot is that we have a 90% Net Promoter Score.
Yeah, so what? Your competitor has 96. Yeah, so I don't know if this is true, so I'm kind of spouting off, but I think I read something several years ago that when Kmart went out of business, I think they had the highest CSAT they had for several years. Well, it just also happens that Target was much higher, right? So congratulations, you're out of business. It's the competitive comparison is what really matters.
Okay, so maybe surveys are a good place to start, but if you're seeing gaps, that might be when you start to add in these other sorts of engagements to start filling in those gaps. Is that correct?
Not only as you're seeing gaps, but also I need to learn more. So my customers are responding in a particular way, and I just don't get it. I mean, so they've got a problem with my order fulfillment process. Well, I didn't know we had a problem there. So what is the problem? I mean, you can't go deep into everything on a survey. You'll get fatigue,
right.
and people will not bother responding. So it is a start. It's just, again, it's like a dialogue. Right. I wouldn't ask you a question, you give me a 2-word answer, and we walk away, right?
I understand everything. Thank you.
Right. I now know you intimately.
Yes. And goodbye.
Yeah. That's
that's a great point, Shannon, because, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So if you're a company that has found success with surveys, you just keep doing the surveys, right?
And success might mean no one's yelling at you because you're not doing something different.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like your stock price hasn't dipped that much, or your sales haven't dipped that much, and it's it's kind of steady and everything, right? So you check that box.
It's almost my most frustrating type of customer is one that's doing pretty good. I mean, despite your instant visibility to you could be amazing. Well, why would I bother? We're doing pretty good.
No, it's interesting because I read and listened to a story about the people behind Airbnb, for example, right? And they kept doing this like, well, what's a 4-star experience at like a hotel, right? Or a 5-star experience. Then they started pontificating about like, what would a 10-star experience be? Like, what would a 12-star experience be? Like Beyonce flies in her private jet and picks you up and takes you, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it was this stuff where they were fantasizing about like, what is, and then they were like, okay, now let's take that and let's back it down to something we could actually fulfill on.
Sure.
Which I thought was a really interesting exercise to do. Like, how could I make this experience be so wonderful, but people are so locked into like, what are the resources and tools that I have in front of me now, and they're not willing to look at it like, well, what if this was the fantasy world, and I'm God, I can change anything I want. You could look at that and sure, yes, it's fanciful to think like you can get Beyonce to fly everywhere and drop people off in private jet. But what if we could back it down to something that maybe gives that same sort of sentiment from the organization or things, right? That you are a rock star, you're super important or things like that.
I think that approach makes super sense because we can't ignore the financial realities of our business. We don't have unlimited funds and unlimited resources.
Right.
But starting with what would be absolutely amazing and working your way back, because there's also a reality that there's a diminishing return on the customer experience investment you make. At some point, you've crossed kind of the delight, and the more and more dollars you got to expend to move that needle, it gets harder and harder and harder. So there's a diminishing return that comes. But fortunately, most companies, if they just rose to the level of meeting expectations, their businesses would double.
Right. If they could just meet the expectations, right? Well, and I think that's where, again, I feel like a lot of organizations have problems doing that because as a consumer, you're experiencing almost the entire organization except for maybe the accounting department in some cases. But each of those organizations are working independently in a lot of places, right? So you know what I mean? Those divisions are working independently. So you're getting a different experience depending on who you're talking to, right? Like if I'm working with a salesperson on the floor versus one over the phone versus a very different experience.
Absolutely right. And that's why I'm a huge advocate of doing both transactional and relationship-based interactions with your customer. I mean, because the experience I have with the rep I just got off the phone with is different than the experience I'm going to have with the salesperson that comes to see me next week or absolutely right about that. And all of those experiences together knit the relationship I have. So I can have some very, very negative experiences, but still love you as a company.
Sure.
And if you do one or the other, you miss it. You miss this customer loves me, but I miss I had some really negative interactions with them. And if I do just on the transactional side, I may see the negative stuff, but not see that they love me overall. So it's important to do both. And when you mentioned the metrics before, I'm also a huge advocate of using all of them. Net Promoter Score, Customer Effort Score, CSAT score. They all measure something different. They all have a place. They're all an information point.
Yeah.
But again, it's digging into why we got the scores we got.
Sure. So let's back up just for 1 second to cap it off. And first starting with like internal interviews, right? Finding out what is the actual problem we're dealing with, and then confirming that internally we feel like we're aligned on that. And then initial customer outreach to see like, is that also a problem for you? And, other things. And then some competitive research as well.
Correct.
What else am I missing in there?
And then moving on to much more in-depth engagements with your customers. So once you've gone through the internal kind of validation and hypothesis gathering, going out and getting feedback from your customers, and then using that feedback to design much more strategic and in-depth conversations to get real answers about what should we do? Should we do this or should we do this? Can we try this with you? What do you think about this answer? And then finally, using those responses from your customers to pick the bets you're going to take in the marketplace, the things you're going to go do. And then ultimately closing the loop, going back and saying, we heard you. Yeah. This is what we did. What do you think?
Did it work?
Right. I mean, wouldn't it be awesome if every single customer you had was an advocate of yours, was on your team helping you drive the business?
Yeah. And I think, like you said, you have to have that mindset that this is a marathon, not a sprint.
Absolutely.
Like this is an investment over time. We can't change sentiment overnight or whatever, right?
And if that's not what you want, don't call me.
Well, perfect. Well, that's a perfect place to segue into. Shannon, I want to thank you for joining me. So if I want to find out more about Shannon, Service 800, and the work that you're doing, what's a great place to check?
Yeah, LinkedIn's probably the easiest way to connect with me. We are, as I joined Service 800, I'm also bringing the consultative work that CCS did into that business. And so we are rapidly developing a portfolio of not just feedback collection through surveys, phone interviews, face-to-face interviews, IVR, social media analytics. We're now adding the kind of consultative programmatic building of customer experience and process and transformation.
Nice. Well, Shannon, again, I want to thank you. I learned a lot. I appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to The Schmidt List. If you want to learn more about how Foundry accelerates innovation, check out foundrymakes.com. And if you'd like me to speak about establishing a growth mindset at your conference or with your team, drop me a note at kurt@foundrymakes.com. Oh, and the next time you're on the internet, head to iTunes and leave the show a review. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend, because sharing is caring. I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen to the show, and I hope you have a fantastic week.